Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading to Nepal, a country that, well, abolished its monarchy nearly 2 decades ago, back in 2008.
That's right.
But what's really caught our attention recently is this pretty significant upswing in pro-monarchy sentiment. It's not just talk either, it's spilling out into actual street protests.
Exactly. And our deep dive today, well, the mission is really to try and get under the skin of this resurgence. We've got a couple of recent reports we're drawing on, trying to understand the forces behind it, who the key players are, and what it might all mean for Nepal's future.
It's a fascinating situation, isn't it? A paradox almost. The monarchy is officially gone, history, but now you've got this considerable chunk of the population actively calling for its return.
Yeah,
It clearly signals some, well, profound dissatisfaction with how things are now.
absolutely.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What was the spark? What really triggered this recent surge in activity?
Well, what's striking is just the scale and the emotional intensity we've seen in these recent protests. Over the last few weeks, Kathmandu has really been the focal point.
Right.
We're talking thousands taking to the streets, calling for the monarchy to be reinstated. And these weren't just, brief gatherings.
Yeah.
Significant numbers, passionately chanting slogans like, "Long live the king," and "Raja o Desh Basho,"
Oh, it was.
translates roughly to "King, come and save the country." Pretty powerful stuff.
Wow, yeah, very direct. And it wasn't all peaceful, was it? I remember the reports mentioned some serious clashes.
Regrettably, yes.
Hmm.
The protests on March 28th, they did take a violent turn. Tragic, actually. Reports indicate 3 deaths
Oh, wow.
and over 100 arrests.
Yeah.
So that escalation really highlights, the depth of feeling here. It's a stark reminder this isn't just some abstract political debate for people.
Absolutely not. And it sounds like these protests, they aren't happening in a vacuum. There's a connection being drawn to, well, wider frustrations in Nepal.
Precisely. If you look at the broader context, the reports consistently point to widespread discontent. Discontent with the political establishment, ongoing economic instability, and, frankly, endemic corruption. Those seem to be the core drivers.
Okay.
It's been, about 17 years since the monarchy ended? And in that time, Nepal's seen something like 13 different governments.
13 in 17 years.
Yeah. That kind of rapid turnover, it doesn't just mean shifting policies. It's really eroded public trust in the whole democratic process.
You can see how it would.
It creates a kind of vacuum. And historical symbols, like the monarchy, can more easily fill that space. People start looking back, maybe idealizing a perceived era of stability.
Right, even if the reality was more complicated. 13 governments. That's an incredible amount of flux. It really paints a picture of a struggle for consistent governance.
Definitely.
Now, central to all of this, whether he's actively angling for the throne or not, is the former king, Gyanendra Shah. What's his role in this resurgence?
His role is, well, it's quite nuanced. He hasn't come out and explicitly called for restoration, not in so many words.
Okay.
But his public statements expressing concern about Nepal's current situation, politically, economically, they clearly resonate deeply with a, significant segment of the population.
They see him as a symbol, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. A symbol of a potentially more stable past, especially compared to the recent turmoil.
That makes perfect sense given the instability we just talked about.
Yeah.
And it seems his recent return to Kathmandu really amplified things.
Undeniably. When he came back to Kathmandu in February, it was after a pilgrimage, and the welcome he received. It was huge, really enthusiastic.
Thousands, I read.
Thousands of supporters at the
Wow.
airport, yeah. Echoing those same calls, Raja al Desh Basho. It was a very visible, very potent display of that enduring support for the monarchy.
So you've got this groundswell of public feeling, the former king as a symbol. What about the other side, the current political leadership? How are they reacting?
Well, the ruling coalition is firmly against any return to the monarchy. Their opposition is pretty robust.
Understandable.
Especially after those clashes on March 28th. Several prominent leaders really voiced strong disapproval, targeting the former king and the whole movement.
The reports mentioned specific names, didn't they?
Yes. Former Prime Ministers Pushpa Kamal Dahal, often known just as Prachanda,
Right, the Maoist leader.
and Madhav Kumar Nepal. They were particularly vocal. They actually went so far as to demand Gyanendra Shah's arrest.
Arrest? Wow.
Yeah, accusing him of actively inciting the unrest. That's a serious escalation in rhetoric.
A very serious accusation. And where does the current Prime Minister, KP Sharma Oli, fit into this picture?
That brings up a really important point, because Prime Minister Oli himself Well, he hasn't been immune to controversy. There are ongoing allegations of corruption against him.
Ah, okay.
And that backdrop, that perception of corruption within the current leadership, it just adds fuel to the fire, doesn't it? It feeds the public discontent that's partly driving this pro-monarchy feeling.
Right. It makes the current system isn't working argument stronger for those people.
Exactly. It creates this sense that the system isn't delivering, which, makes people look back, even if the past wasn't perfect either.
Absolutely. So it sounds like the failures of the Republican experiment, as the reports put it, are really a primary catalyst here. Can we dig into those specific failures a bit more?
Certainly. The disillusionment seems to come from several connected problems. We've touched on the political infighting, that sheer instability of government after government. But the persistent corruption scandals, they've also been crucial in eroding public trust. The report specifically mentioned Oli's alleged involvement in a land scam.
Right.
And accusations against other former PMs too, like Prachanda and Sher Bahadur Dubba. It fosters this image, right or wrong, of a political elite looking out for themselves while the country struggles.
So a widespread feeling that the political class isn't serving the interests of ordinary Nepalese.
Precisely. And this feeling of, well, betrayal almost, it's compounded by the economic stagnation many are facing.
Yeah.
The reports highlight high unemployment, stubbornly high, and a significant number of young people leaving Nepal looking for better prospects elsewhere.
Brain drain, essentially.
You could call it that. When people feel the current system isn't improving their lives, isn't creating opportunities, they naturally become more open to other ideas. Even a return to a familiar past, however romanticized it might be.
And it's interesting, it's not just the traditional old guard royalists leading this charge, is it? This name, Durga Prasai, keeps popping up. Who is he? Why is he significant?
Durga Prasai is a really fascinating figure here. He's actually a former Maoist guerrilla.
A former Maoist? Seriously?
Yeah. Yes. Quite a political journey. He's emerged as a very prominent, very vocal advocate for restoring the monarchy. His campaign, running under the banner Protect the Nation, Nationalism, Religion, Culture, and Citizens, has really struck a chord with many who feel let down by the Republic.
Wow. A former Maoist leading a pro-monarchy push, that's quite something. What's the core appeal of his message? Why is it working?
Well, his rhetoric seems incredibly effective at tapping into that disillusionment we've been talking about. He skillfully blends these strong appeals to national pride, Nepali identity, with sharp, often populist criticisms of the current political establishment.
Right.
And what's really interesting is how his voice, his campaign, seems to have in many ways overshadowed the more traditional royalist figures. He seems to have this knack for connecting with a broader group of people who feel marginalized, unheard.
Sounds like a potent mix of factors driving this. But, okay, despite this growing support, the reports also suggest the pro-monarchy movement has its own internal issues, challenges.
That's just a crucial observation, yeah. While the sentiment is clearly rising, it's still far from certain if it can actually consolidate into a viable, unified political force.
Why not?
Well, there are significant internal divisions within the movement itself. For instance, there doesn't seem to be a clear consensus on what a restored monarchy would even look like.
Ah, okay, like how much power the king would have.
Exactly. Some want a full return to significant royal power, maybe like the old days. Others suggest a more symbolic constitutional role, like the UK or Japan.
Big difference.
Huge difference. And of course, any serious push for restoration would absolutely face fierce resistance from the established pro-Republican parties. They're not just going to roll over.
No, you wouldn't expect them to. Now, shifting focus a bit, Nepal isn't in a vacuum. What about geopolitics? Are outside influences playing a role here?
This is a really interesting layer. The reports do highlight potential influence from a couple of key international actors. First, there's potential impact of, say, shifting U.S. foreign policy priorities.
How so?
Well, the report suggests there have been instances where the U.S. has raised concerns about anti-religious sentiment in Nepal, specifically regarding Hindu identity protection.
Okay.
Now, the federal system established after the monarchy was meant to be more inclusive of Nepal's diverse groups. But the concern from some, including perhaps implicitly the U.S. in these instances, is whether this system adequately safeguards the identity of the Hindu majority.
So a potential change in U.S. focus or concern about religious issues could maybe inadvertently create more space for these pro-monarchy arguments.
It's certainly a factor to watch. If U.S. support for the current federal structure wavers, even slightly, or is perceived to waver.
Yeah.
It could embolden those who feel the system was perhaps externally influenced or isn't working for the majority.
Interesting. And what about India, Nepal's massive neighbor? Their role seems complicated, according to the report.
Very complex, yeah.
Hmm.
Under the BJP, Modi's government, India has put a strong emphasis on Hindu nationalism, Hindutva.
Right.
This has naturally led to speculation. Could they see a strategic advantage in Nepal, a Hindu-majority nation potentially returning to a monarchy, seen by some as a symbol of that Hindu identity?
Hmm.
Unlike previous Indian governments, Modi's administration has kept a bit more distance from Nepal's mainstream political parties. They seem to engage more directly with religious and conservative groups within Nepal.
And there was that speculation about links to the former king.
Yes, there have been unconfirmed reports, whispers really, about indirect communication between Jayanendra and Indian officials, possibly via Bhutan. Hard to verify, but the speculation is there.
So even though India officially says it supports Nepal's federal system.
Exactly. While that's the official line support for the Federal Democratic Republic, their relative silence or lack of strong endorsement for the current political establishment is noticeable. It's a kind of strategic ambiguity.
What does that ambiguity signal, do you think?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Does it mean they might be open to a shift? Or are they just trying to avoid getting too entangled in Nepal's internal politics? It's hard to say for sure. They might just be keeping their options open.
Right, playing it cautious. Now, and it's still a big if the monarchy were restored somehow, what might that actually look like? The reports mentioned different possibilities.
They do. Historically, Nepal had an executive monarchy. The king held real power.
Mm,
But the global trend now is constitutional monarchies, symbolic roles, like we see in the UK, Japan, Spain.
right.
Now, Gyanendra's own actions back between 2001 and 2006, when he took more direct control, might suggest he'd prefer a stronger, more executive role if he returned.
Based on past behavior.
Potentially. But, for broader legitimacy today, maybe some kind of hybrid system, blending monarchy with elected governance might be the only viable path.
Yeah.
But beyond the structure,
Yes.
any restored monarchy would have to offer a compelling vision for Nepal's future, especially on the economy, tackling unemployment, corruption, the very issues fueling this discontent now.
That's a crucial point. Just bringing back the king symbolically won't fix those deep-seated problems.
Not at all. It needs a credible plan.
And what about internationally? Aligning too closely with, say, India's Hindu nationalist stance could complicate things with other players, like China.
Precisely. Maintaining a balanced foreign policy would be absolutely critical.
Mm.
And, as the reports stress, today, any potential restoration would have to give solid assurances to Nepalese and the world about protecting human rights and political freedoms. That's non-negotiable now.
Absolutely. Now, one thing we haven't really touched on, these large protests, they cost money. Mobilizing thousands of people doesn't just happen. The reports wondered about the financial backing for this movement.
That's a key question, and yet the reports float several plausible theories. One is domestic support royalist business interest, maybe individuals or companies who benefited under the old system and see advantages in its return.
Makes sense.
Another possibility is foreign influence, specifically perhaps conservative Hindu organizations in India who might see Nepal's monarchy as important for its Hindu identity. And then finally, you've got the Nepali diaspora, people living abroad, maybe unhappy with the current governance, sending money back to support the cause.
So potentially multiple sources.
It's likely a mix, yeah. It's interesting to think about where specifically it might come from. Are there certain industries in Nepal traditionally linked to the palace? Are there known Indian groups active internationally on these issues? These are important background questions.
Definitely feels like a movement of this scale would need several funding streams. Now, that Nepal Aja report, it seemed to put a lot of weight on Gyanendra's recent return to Kathmandu. What was the main takeaway there?
Well, his arrival from Pokhara back to Kathmandu, it was hugely anticipated by his supporters. They were hoping for a really grand, symbolic welcome.
Did they get it?
Not entirely. The reports noted a lack of the traditional ceremonial gates and things like that. But the enthusiasm among the supporters who did turn out was undeniable, palpable.
So the passion was there even without the official pomp.
Exactly. They clearly see his return, his presence, as potentially pivotal. And it served to highlight again that fragility of the current political scene, the federal parties wrestling with their own infighting, plus that widespread public disillusionment we keep coming back to.
Right. So even without the fanfare, the crowd's energy sent its own message.
A powerful message, yeah.
Okay, looking ahead then, what's the potential trajectory here? Is a full-scale restoration of the monarchy actually realistic?
Under the current constitution, a full restoration with real executive power seems, well, unlikely,
Oh,
at least in the short term.
right.
But, as the report suggests, the ongoing struggles of the federal system, those persistent public grievances, they could allow this pro-monarchy movement to grow and become a more substantial political force.
So even if it doesn't bring back the king.
It could definitely act as a catalyst. It could force a broader, maybe much-needed political conversation about the fundamental direction Nepal is taking.
Yeah.
Where does it go from here?
So it really sounds like Nepal is at a critical point, like one of the reports said. The next few months, maybe years, could be really decisive.
Indeed. It's this complex mix, isn't it? Deep domestic dissatisfaction, the enduring symbolic pull, the former king, these dynamic new figures like Durga Prasai popping up, and then this whole web of geopolitical influences.
Yeah.
It all points to a period of, well, significant uncertainty. Yeah. And potentially substantial change.
Okay, let's just quickly recap the key things we've sort of pulled out in this deep dive. We've seen this significant comeback almost of pro-monarchy feeling in Nepal.
Driven by deep dissatisfaction.
Yeah, deep dissatisfaction with the current republican system, instability, corruption, economic problems. The former King Jainendra still holds a lot of symbolic weight for many. And these new energetic figures like Durga Prasai are effectively mobilizing people by tacking into that disillusionment.
And doing it quite skillfully, blending nationalism and criticism.
Right. We've also looked at the complex roles of outside players like the US and especially India, and thought about the challenges and different ways the monarchy might or might not fit into the future.
And all this sort of leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought for our listeners. Given these really deep-seated governance issues in Nepal and all these internal and external pressures, what kind of leadership, what political structure could genuinely offer long-term stability and actually meet the needs of the Nepalese people?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And is this current push for the monarchy just a symptom? A symptom of deeper systemic failures that need much more fundamental solutions than simply going back to an old institution?
Definitely something to mull over. A complex situation with no easy answers.